I'd like to use this lecture time today to talk about the language of the frame. The way an image is framed is an essential part of visual storytelling. Similar to a written story that uses descriptive words, the visual storyteller uses the power of imagery to convey a message, present a point of view, and bring the audience into the story. What I'm going to show you today is just basic framing that is used in all forms of art. So we're talking about drawings, film, video, animations, cartoons. All of them are based on these basic terms of framing, and each one of them has a meaning behind it. By the way something is framed presents a meaning. So we're going to start with the first one, which we call an establishing shot, the setting. So an establishing shot gives the viewer a sense of where they are. So here we have an example that we are in the Alps. So the audience then knows where they are, where the story begins, or where the story is located. And then we start with something called the long shot, and we start to introduce the character in the setting. All of the imagery we're speaking about here is based on the human form. So the long shot, we're generally thinking head to toe, or using the people, the size of a person, for scale. Okay. So then we start to get a little closer. So we go from a long shot now to a medium shot. There are other ones in between, but I'm giving you the basics. So the medium shot, we start to define a character. As we get into the story and we get closer to a person, we start to be able to tell more about the character. Now the character doesn't necessarily have to be a person, but more about the central character or central characters. In this setting, you see a setting from To Kill a Mockingbird, and you see this intimate conversation going on between the father and daughter. And then we start to get closer. As we get closer, we start to learn more about the person, and we start to develop, it signifies an intimacy. We start to get the more personal details. You know, when we look at this close-up of this child, what do we see? What do we know? What is that image telling us? How does that make us feel? Same thing with the dog. You know, how does it make us feel? What is he thinking? Is he sad? It really emphasizes what the writer, producer, visual storyteller is trying to say. And then sometimes it's other parts of the body. For example, Mona Lisa's hands. You know, the big question has always been what is Mona Lisa thinking? What is she saying to us by the way her hands are placed? And then we start to get the extreme close-up, and we really, really start getting into details. And many times, this really emphasizes something very strong. And again, with Mona Lisa, those are supposed to be the biggest part of her. What is she thinking with the way her eyes are looking? Is she contemplative? Is she thinking happy? Is she thinking of her loved something? We have to begin to wonder. And the way that is placed within a story tells the story. And then we start to think about, now, the mediums, you know, most things that are drawn or on film and things or in video, there's a very two-dimensional, very flat medium. So you try to figure out how do you create a conversation and start to add a little bit of dimension in here. So in these pieces, we're starting to see that there's a conversation going on. In this piece, you see the two of them looking out at something, but they are together. There's a quiet conversation going on between them because they look the same. They both look like there's something they're upset about or scared about. So something is going on between them that they're both looking at. And then we start looking at other ways to add dimension because, as I mentioned, this is a very flat medium. So here's an example of Dustin Hoffman from the Graduate. The conversation coming from him, what he is saying is essential. And they could just show him, but having him framed by the other leading character's shoulder, it really emphasizes, you know, what he is saying there and also what was transpiring during the scene. And now we're talking about angles and point of view. How do they make the subject seem large or small? What happens there? How do you make something seem more regal or something less important? So by looking up at something, you give it a sense of importance. And looking down on someone, it gives a sense of, you know, smallness, and as with this child. Now we're talking about leading the viewer. You know, in an image, many times what's happening is outside of the scene. So how do you let someone know there's something happening outside of the scene? Whereas the character is part of the scene, but there's a bigger story there. So we use something called the rule of thirds. As you see this little tic-tac-toe drawing here. The emphasis, if you want to play an emphasis and add more dimension or get something outside of the scene, add beauty, many reasons, the emphasis should fall on where the lines cross. So if you were to draw an imaginary piece, you could see that right where they fall. This is of importance here. If we're looking at, we could have gotten just a straight shot of this, but it added so much more dimension and beauty to it, and by offsetting the central character. And in this piece, this was an image my father took in World War II in India. And the central character is, if you look at the rule of thirds, the child, she falls on the line. The story is of her, but what she's looking at is another part of the story, part of what we're leading to here. Many artistic ways of doing things and telling a story is the frame within a frame. This was taken from the movie Citizen Kane, which is a classic movie. And Citizen Kane is known for its story, its cinematography, and its framing. It's classic cinematography framing. And in the story, the mother is of power. She's the closest one to us. And what's happening in the story is she is signing away the rights for her son to live with this lawyer gentleman and take him from the father and from their home. And she is of power, as you can see, as she's the strongest thing in the scene. But the element through the frame here is the child. And he is the one that's going to be leaving to live with someone. So he is being framed as a part of the scene, an essential part of the scene, but she's the strength and he is in there smaller, but again, framed so we know he is key to the scene. And then we do something, as I talked about a little bit earlier, but again, we'll talk about leading the viewer, what's outside of the scene. Now, many times when you shoot moving imagery in film or video, if a person was walking, you wouldn't center them here and they're walking. You want to give a sense that they're going somewhere. So you're leading the viewer when you pan across the image here and follow the character. You're leading the viewer to something else. Same here. This character in animation, she's contemplating something and it's outside of her reach. We're thinking about, it's leading us to believe that there's something else there that she's looking at and she's looking or thinking about. And we'll talk a little bit about if you're doing something with suspense. And in suspense, what they try to do is they throw you off a little bit. It's not normally what you see. It's not the angle that you're used to seeing. It kind of jars you, and Alfred Hitchcock was one of the best at this. It jars you because it's not something that you're used to, you're visually used to observing. So just for now, I'd like you to think about this. From your knowledge of the frame that we just talked about, what is the story in this image? What are we seeing here? What's the placement say to us? What's happening here? And where are we? And what is this saying about the people in the picture? Just take some time and think about it to yourself. We also have another very famous imagery from photographer Lewis Hine. Lewis Hine was instrumental in helping pass child labor laws. And after the Great Depression, he was one of the photographers assigned to go out and take images throughout the country. And here is an image of a child a young child working in a factory. So what is the center of the story here? What's leading us to see the center of the story? How is it framed to tell the story? So that's what I want you to think about in these lessons, and that's what we're going to be doing, is looking at how language comes through an image. Thank you.